we have another culinary all-star from Colorado who will be joining us in the Represent neighborhood.
Yes, it is Adrian Miller. So Adrian is a historian. He's really fascinating, and he's going to be talking at Newtopia about Black culinary history, looking at different ingredients that have been adapted from typical West African cuisine, things that were brought over to this country, substitutions that have found, and really how this cuisine has influenced so many CPG brands. So really fascinating conversation. And he's actually going to also lead a panel discussion with a brand, with investors that invest in Black-owned brands.
And we thought this was such an exciting perspective to bring to the stage because we're talking so much about heritage-rooted foods and more multicultural products in the CPG industry. And so I think what Adrian does so beautifully is bridge those two worlds, the culinary world and the CPG space, and celebrates all of the diversity that we're continuing to see more and more of, to specifically look at Black culinary history and really also talk about the historical context. Why does this matter?
Yeah, I was going to say what I really love about his work is that historian's point of view, really bringing those roots in. Where did it come from and why are we where we are today?
We got to talk to Adrian Miller in downtown Denver and hear about his work and how it will come to life at Newtopia Now. All right, we're here at Doppio Craft Coffee in Denver, which is home to Newtopia Now. I'm so excited to have Adrian Miller here. Adrian, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, good to be with you.
And you're going to be speaking at Newtopia Now. We found you and we're like, we need your amazingness, all of your great perspectives on the culinary world and on Black culinary history, which is going to be one of our topics at Newtopia. Before we get into that, let's take a step back. Tell us about the work that you do, because I do think it sounds like you have the coolest job ever.
Yeah, so I'm the soul food scholar. My tagline is dropping knowledge like hot biscuits. So I'm a self-proclaimed culinary historian. And I fell into it as a hobby. And people often ask me, well, how'd you become a culinary historian? I say the short answer is unemployment. So, yeah, I was working in the Clinton White House, and I had just ended my stint there. And I wanted to come back to Colorado and start my political career because my hope at that time was to be one of the U.S. senators representing Colorado. So I was trying to get back here. The job market was really slow because the internet bubble had just burst. So I was just in D.C. much longer than I thought, and I was watching a lot of daytime television. I'm really embarrassed to tell you what shows.
You got to tell me.
Jerry.
Oh, come on. Me too, right?
But that's just scratching the surface. I mean, Ricky Lake, Sally Jesse Raphael, Blind Date,
come on.
Love Connection, although that's a good show.
We got to bring those back.
Yeah. So at some point I just said, in the depth of my depravity, I should read something. So I went to a local bookstore, and I'd always like to cook, so I saw this book on the history of Southern food written by a guy named John Edgerton. It was called Southern Food at Home, on the Road, in History. Early in the book, he wrote this one sentence that changed my life. The tribute to Black achievement in American cookery remains to be written. So he wrote those words in the late 80s. I'm reading it in 2001, and I thought, well, that's interesting. So I reached out to him. I loved the book. And I sent him a fan email, and I said, Mr. Edgerton, I really like this book. You wrote this one sentence. It's been a while. Do you still think this is true? And he said, yeah, for the most part, nobody's written the full story. There's always room for another voice, so why not yours? So with no qualifications at all, except for eating a lot of soul food and cooking it some, I decided to start that journey. I ended up coming back to Denver. I did get a political job, and then I was just like an amateur grad student. So after work and on weekends, I would go to the Denver Public Library. So blessed to be in a community with a world-class library. And I just grabbed everything I could on African-American food and cuisine and the history. Also, they have something called an interlibrary loan system, so I could get books from other places. That was a great way for a broke brother like me to amass a lot of knowledge. And that's what a public library is for. So I ended up reading 3,500 oral histories of formerly enslaved people, and I outlined every reference to food. I read 500 cookbooks, half of them authored by African Americans, because I wanted to put African American food in a larger culinary context. See what the connections are, the similarities. Read thousands of old newspapers and magazines because a lot of these things are being digitized and they're word searchable. talked to hundreds of people, and then because I care about my subject so much, I decided to eat my way through the country. So I went to 150 soul food.
That's the best part.
Yeah.
The reason gotta be, right?
Went to 150 soul food restaurants, 35 cities in 15 states.
Wow.
So that's how I can call myself the soul food scholar, because I don't think anybody's done that.
That title. You have absolutely earned that. It's so fascinating. So as you were doing that work to kind of uncover food's role in African American history, what were a couple of the things that stood out to you as being surprising or particularly impactful?
So I think one of the real surprising things was there's been two steady drumbeats of criticism towards soul food. One is that it's slave food, it's the stuff that white people don't want. I got criticism like, why are you trying to celebrate white man's garbage? And then the other one is that this stuff is inherently unhealthy, soul food needs a warning label, it's going to kill you if you eat it. What drove me to write a lot of the stuff that I've written is to just sort out fact from fiction.
Yeah.
When it comes to this criticism about it's the white man's garbage and things like that, what surprised me is I found that white people often ate the same foods. So it really was more about, in the American South, it was more about class and place than it was about race.
Interesting.
So pretty much because of race, people didn't eat together, but people of the same socioeconomic class in a place were often eating the same foods. So that was huge because that upended the whole narrative of, oh yeah, soul food was just created for black people almost as a punishment. So that just didn't ring true.
Yeah.
So that was eye-opening.
And then talk about the health piece, because that's really interesting and of course so relevant to the industry that New Hope works in and Newtopia Now, celebrating a diverse range of healthy products in the CPG industry. So what did you find there?
So the interesting thing about the health story with soul food is a lot of my work has been to get people to think about soul food in a different way. So what we think of as soul food is really the celebration food of the American South that black migrants took to other parts of the country. And it follows the immigrant story. So usually when people immigrate to the United States, especially if they open up a restaurant, they showcase the celebration food of their culture because they want to show off the very best of their culture. There may be some everyday stuff,
right,
but the menu is heavily skewed towards the celebration stuff. That's what soul food is. It's like a migrant cuisine that focuses on the celebration stuff. For example, fried chicken. 100 years ago, fried chicken was something you got every once in a while.
Yeah.
It was not something like today. We can have fried chicken multiple times a day if we want to. Barbecue, that was once in a while food. Cakes, pies, it's all celebration food. So I don't care. Whatever culture it is, if you consistently eat the celebration food, that's not going to be good for your health.
Right.
So I'm trying to get people to understand that we're focusing on a celebration food that's become more commonplace than it used to be.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I say is that if you just look at the building blocks of soul food and what nutritionists are telling us to eat, more dark leafy greens, more sweet potatoes, fish, okra is a superfood, hibiscus is a superfood. These are all part of that tradition. And if you go all the way back to West Africa, strong plant-based tradition in African American cuisine. And so I'm just trying to get people to rethink this and then put things in proper perspective.
Yeah.
And then always the question of moderation. Also, two other things. So people are looking at the health outcomes of African Americans and thinking that, oh, well, it must be because of this steady diet of soul food. I would ask people to have a little more critical thinking about that. From my anecdotal observation, I don't think people are loading up on soul food all the time. I think they're eating a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
Junk food, convenience food. So I think that's part of the story.
Right.
And the other thing that I think really needs to be considered is you don't think that 24/7 exposure to racism is not going to affect your health. So I think there are environmental factors that need to come into play.
Yeah.
So I'm asking people to have a more complex and comprehensive look at African American food, consumption, and just all of the things that lead to health outcomes.
Yeah. So as we look ahead to Newtopia Now in August, in your session, which is From Legacy to Leadership, Black Culinary History and the Future of CPG, why is it important for the CPG industry, the industry that is populating grocery stores and gas stations and everywhere else that we're getting packaged products, why is it important for this industry to understand this historical context and also understand all different types of foods, all those amazing ingredients that you talked about that are part of Black culinary history. Why does that matter for the consumer packaged goods industry?
Well, I think it's a tremendous opportunity for people in that industry to lean into these traditions that I don't think are very well known. Like when people think about soul food, they think about some aspects of it, but I don't know if they really understand the plant-based heritage that's playing out now. I mean, the hottest trend right now in soul food is vegan. That's where you're seeing a lot of the creativity and artistry and just kind of next level playing around with stuff.
That's so exciting to me, right? I also wanted to ask you about that because you're a barbecue judge, right?
Mm-hmm. Certified.
And then you're also talking about the role of vegan in soul food. So that's a really interesting kind of contrast that we're seeing there.
Right, and plant-based is even happening in barbecue. So jackfruit is a very common trend now in barbecue.
Yeah.
And if somebody knows what they're doing, they can make jackfruit have a similar taste and texture to meat.
Yeah.
Which is just really interesting. And then other people are playing with roots like lotus root or burdock, cutting it in a way to make it look like a rib tip, and then smoking it and adding sauce. Yeah, so there's just a lot of playfulness, and it's good. It tastes good too. So that always helps. Yeah, I just seeing this as a tremendous opportunity to educate consumers about these African plant-based traditions that show up in this part of the world. So another interesting thing that's happening right now is diasporic dinners. And so what you're seeing are chefs are telling the story of African heritage people in the Americas through food. So they'll have a multi-course meal. The first dish will be something that represents West Africa. The second dish will be something that represents the Caribbean. And then the third course would be something that represents the United States. Yeah. And it depends on that chef's journey and their heritage. And so I think this energy towards creating these connections to West Africa is really interesting. And some of the most exciting stuff happening in food right now is taking some of these lost crops of Africa and seeing what the potential is for them to solve the world's hunger crisis, like fonio, for example, an ancient grain from West Africa. People are looking at things like that. So I think it's an exciting time.
Yeah, I totally agree. And fonio is a great example. Like we're seeing a lot of food companies in the CPG space figuring out how to capture the health benefits as well as kind of scale the supply chain and create whole new markets internationally for certain ingredients that have been forgotten for a long time. Between that and these kind of new supply chains that are leveraging these really critical international ingredients and nutrient-packed international ingredients, and then also, as you pointed out, the connection that food can create to place and to people. And so I think there's a really important role, of course, for chefs and culinary historians and also for manufacturers and brands and products to not forget the rich history of the foods that they're bringing to people in different formats.
Right. And I think the critical part of all of this is we need consumers to show up and actually buy these products because, ultimately it is a business. And people need to know that unless we support the folks doing this kind of work to get these foods out there, they're just going to leave the industry. Yeah. And so we need to support them.
Could not agree more. Well, there's our call to action. I guess final words. This has been such a great conversation since we have people from all over the country and all over the world coming to Newtopia Now, and you're so deep in the culinary world here in Denver. What are a couple can't miss things right here in Denver that people should check out?
For those who are visiting Denver, if you have Apple Maps, I have a Soul Food Scholar Guide to Denver. So there are multiple restaurants that are used there. I collaborated with a Black-owned restaurant finding app called Eat Okra. And so that's a collab that we did for Apple Maps. So you get a lot of good recommendations there. So a few places I'll mention. One of my favorite West African places is actually in Lakewood, which is a suburb immediately west of Denver. But it's called African Grill and Bar. They're from Ghana, but they make from all parts of Africa, actually. So it's a very continent-represented menu, but that's really good. In terms of soul food, the one that's open right now, there are a couple places I really like, but they're either temporarily closed or relocating. But I love Blazing Chicken Shack 2. They have amazing fried chicken and catfish. For a higher-end place, there's a place called La French that has a location about 8th in Colorado, in central Denver, and then also in the Denver Tech Center. And they're from Senegal. But they're doing kind of interpretations of Senegalese French food. It's kind of like a fusion thing. But that's a really nice place as well. So those are my top 3 picks right now.
hot tips, hot picks from the soul food scholar. I love it. Is it too early for fried chicken?
No.
Never. Well, thank you so much. We're so excited to have you at Newtopia Now and appreciate you chatting with me today.
Yeah, thank you.